All right. Thanks everybody for coming. Like I said, my name is Steve, and we're going to be talking a little bit about financial aid and paying for college and that kind of thing. So quickly, just making sure that everybody's on the same page. I like to just go over the various kinds of financial aid and just define some key terms. So you have gift aid, which is grants and scholarships, and then you have self-help aid, which is loans and student employment or work study. Just differentiating a little bit between scholarships and grants, I don't think you need to get super caught up in what it's called. This is all gift aid, meaning it's money given to the student and the family. It gets subtracted from the bill and you don't have to pay it back. In general, most families are like, great, I don't care whether it's called a grant or a scholarship, I just want more of that and I want it deducted from the bill. But just talking a little bit about the differences between them. Scholarships are merit-based, meaning the student did something to earn that money. It could be their academic performance, it could be they're amazing at the oboe, or they're a really great dancer, or the world's best quarterback. Or some schools even have things where, oh, you were in AVID or a college prep organization. Or I know there are some schools, not St. Olaf, but there are some schools where maybe it's like, oh, your cousin went here, your grandma went here, something like that, and they'll give you a little bit of a scholarship. But in general, scholarships, nothing to do with a family's financial circumstances and just, based on the student's merits. Most of these are going to be coming from the school, the institution where the student would be going. And so they're tied to that school. It's not like if St. Olaf offers you an oboe scholarship and you decide to go to a different school, that oboe scholarship doesn't follow you to the new school. There are some private foundation scholarships where maybe it's from the local Rotary or the youth basketball team or something like that, where maybe it can go to various schools, but most are pretty school specific. Then you have grants, which are need-based aid, meaning it is based on a family's financial circumstances and the information is coming from a financial aid application. So the only way to get grants is to apply for financial aid. You could get a scholarship just by applying to the school, but if you're looking for grant aid, meaning need-based aid, it does require you to fill out a financial aid application. And these grants can come from three sources. There's the federal Pell Grant, that's the main federal grant. And that, if a student's getting that through the FAFSA, that will follow them to any school in the US. Then there could be money from the state where the student lived and went to high school. And that's gonna be mostly tied to attending college in the state where the student grew up. So if you're from Colorado, Colorado is not gonna give you Colorado state funding to come to St. Olaf. If you were from Minnesota and you came to St. Olaf, the state of Minnesota might give you money, but Colorado is not. And vice versa, Olaf or the state of Minnesota isn't going to give you money if you decide you want to go to the University of Denver or something like that. And then there's institutional, where it's again tied to that specific school. And the goal of these grants is to distribute limited resources in an equitable way. And most financial aid packages at St. Olaf will have a mix of grants and scholarships. It's not usually one or the other, especially if you applied for need-based aid. The next kind of financial aid is student employment or work study. So this is working on campus mostly, and tons of different offices and opportunities on campus. The funding could come from the school or the state or the federal government. I don't think the student or family really needs to care where the funding is coming from. They just care that the student is getting paid. Another thing I like to point out with work study is it's pretty part-time. It's not a 30, 40 hour a week thing. This is usually somewhere 2, 3, 4, 7, maybe even up to 10 hours a week, especially that first year when they're on campus. They're going to be probably closer to the 2 to 5 hours a week thing. And then maybe as you get to even spring semester of your first year or sophomore, junior year, that kind of thing, maybe it goes up into the double digits. But especially that first year, that first semester, you're just trying to figure things out. For these, you do get paid hourly, and you have to work in order to get paid. Every year I get someone who will ask like, hey, when do I get paid work study? And I'm like, well, where are you working? And they're like, oh, do I have to work to get paid work study? And the answer is yes, you do have to work a job in order to get paid work study. And then how you get paid can vary a little bit from school to school. There might be some schools where it only can go to a student's personal bank account, but then there are also other schools where maybe, like at St. Olaf, you can choose to either have it go straight towards tuition, or you could have it go to the student's personal bank account. The next thing on here is loans. So this is everyone's least favorite kind of financial aid. This is money given to the student or given to the school on the student's behalf to pay for their education, but this has to be paid back, almost always with interest. Usually there's no payments required while the student is in school, but you could if you wanted to, but you don't necessarily have to make payments while the student is in school. And then usually the repayment schedule afterwards is 10 years. If you want to try to pay it off faster, awesome, they'll take your money, but you don't necessarily. You usually have up to 10 years. And then the final thing I want to highlight on this slide is that just because a financial aid award has loans on there doesn't mean that a student or family needs to take them. We are required to notify you of what you're eligible to take, but just because something is listed doesn't mean you need to take it or you need to take all of the available funding. Every first-year student, for the most part, is going to be eligible for up to $5,500 in federal student loans. Maybe you don't need any of it. Great, decline it all. Or maybe you only need $2,000. If that's okay, if that's the case, take $2,000. Don't take the full $5,500. We have, like I said, we have to notify you what you're eligible of, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what you have to take. The purpose of this slide is to just let you know what different loans are out there and what kind of basics about them. So the top line is the Federal Stafford Direct Loan, the subsidized and unsubsidized. Maybe you've heard about that. The important thing to know is the subsidized does not accrue interest while you're in school. The subsidized, no interest. The unsubsidized does accrue interest while you're in school. Obviously, the best kind of loan is no loan, but if you're going to be taking a loan, you'd want to do the subsidized first and then the unsubsidized. And those are the only loans really that a student can get completely on their own without anyone else being involved. Both the Federal Parent Plus loan and the alternative private loan that are listed on there, those are going to require someone else to be involved besides the student. With the Parent Plus loan, that's a loan from the federal government to the student. It's in the student's name, will always be in the student's name, or sorry, it will be in the parent's name, always be in the parent's name. They can't transfer it over to the student. With the alternative or private loans, that is going to be a loan from a bank, a credit union, some sort of financial institution where the loan is in the student's name, but a parent or somebody else is co-signing, okay? So again, the Stafford direct subsidized and unsubsidized, those are the only ones that a student can get completely on their own. Everything else is going to require someone else to be involved. Yep. So as we're working through aid eligibility, and this is focusing on domestic students, we're going to get to international students in a little bit, but this is focusing first on US citizens and permanent residents. For aid eligibility, there's two main forms. One that most people have heard of called the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and then something called the CSS Profile, which a few people have heard of, but not many. So, and we'll dive into those a little bit more. As far as the FAFSA, like I said, the first F is for free. It is free. Don't pay someone to do it for you. It's not that hard if you have your taxes in front of you. If you have your taxes in front of you, you can usually end up spending more time creating the usernames and passwords for various people versus just actually filling out the form. So the form just became available on October 1st for next school year. So if you're a current senior, great, go ahead and fill out the FAFSA. If you're a current junior or a parent of a junior or a 10th grader or something like that, it's a little too early to fill it out now, but you could fill it out in starting October 1st of their student's senior year. And if you have questions as you go through, that's completely normal, and don't hesitate to reach out for help. So what kind of information will you need for the FAFSA? So the first thing you'll need is kind of some of the personal information, like the student's name, their date of birth, their social security number, their contact information. Something that's helpful is the education history. And what that is like, where are they going to graduate from high school, or did they receive a GED, that kind of thing. We have to know that they finished high school or got a GED, and that's just letting us know where that happened. And then the next thing on there that's in bold is the school FAFSA codes. And that's important because that's how you tell it where you want it to go. So what schools should do that? Because when you're filling out the FAFSA, you can choose to send it to any of 3,000 schools across the United States. You can submit it to up to 10 at a time. And the way you tell it which 10 you want is with the school FAFSA code. Now, if a student has more than 10 schools they're considering, what you should do is, let's say someone has 14 schools they want to send it to. You would submit it to schools 1 through 10, wait a couple days, maybe you delete schools 1, 2, 3, 4, add schools 11, 12, 13, 14, and then resubmit it. That's how you would get it to all 14 schools when you can only do 10 at a time. Similarly, to the student, it'll ask the parent, date of birth, SSN, contact info for the parents or parent who is on the FAFSA. And then it'll ask about that parent's marital status and the household size and how many people in that household are going to be attending college next year. And then as financial, I'd say it's helpful to have your W-2s, your 1040s, that kind of thing, if the students and the parents worked and have that information. Something that's important to know about assets for both student and parent is it really only asks 3 questions. So it'll ask about how much is available in cash, saving, and checking accounts as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA. It'll ask you about non-retirement investments, such as a rental property or anything like that. That is not including a student's primary residence. So if a family just has their home, that's nowhere on the FAFSA. Anything that's for retirement, not on the FAFSA. But let's say you had a 529 or you had some stocks, that's where kind of that would go. Or if you owned a cabin or something like that, that's the line that would go on. And then as far as business value, it's only asking you to put that information on if you have more than 100 employees or you own farmland that you don't live on. So if the student has a little like business where they make cool t-shirts and sell them to their friends, that doesn't go on there unless that student has over 100 employees on the FAFSA, that kind of thing. When you're in the FAFSA, something that's really helpful is to use that IRS data retrieval tool that's in there, just because then it's pulling the information straight from the IRS website. And we as the financial aid office know that we can trust the numbers, and it's not something where a family accidentally added in 2 zeros because they thought they were supposed to add in cents, and then the FAFSA doesn't want the cents. So it happens a few times every year where someone's typing it in and like maybe the family made $75,000, but they made a little whoopsie by including 2 extra zeros for the cents. So it actually, what we see is $7.5 million, which is obviously a little bit different. So if you can get the IRS data retrieval tool to work, it's generally a strong recommendation. Some other things just to know, please pay attention when you're filling out the FAFSA when it comes to name and social security number, because you can change that later, but it's a big, big pain. Every year, there's a few times where maybe a student's social security number ends in 54, but they accidentally typed in 55. And yes, you can fix that, but it's kind of a pain. So don't do this on your phone or while you're distracted, or like take some time and actually pay attention as you're filling it out. And put your name as what the government thinks it is. So my name is Steve. Everyone calls me Steve. The federal government has my name as Stephen. So I would fill out this form with Stephen, even though no one calls me Stephen except for my sister when I'm in trouble. Then, yep, on the FAFSA, it will tell you specific lines if it's asking questions on the tax return, because you might not know what your untaxed dividend income is, but it'll say, hey, look at line 2A. And then hopefully you can look at line 2A on the 1040 and be like, oh, okay, it was $3. Great. Talked a little bit about the school codes. And then, like I said earlier, every student on the FAFSA will have their own username and password, and every parent on the FAFSA will have their username and password. So at the end of the FAFSA, you get this thing called an EFC, the expected family contribution. This is one of my least favorite things in all of financial aid and additions, because no one actually ends up paying this number. It's a very fair expectation that you would see, oh, expected family contribution, this is what we're going to be paying at schools. And that isn't the case. It's a terrible term used by the US Department of Education that's going away next year. And I get why it's confusing for families, but really this is just an index number that their federal methodology uses to see about eligibility for federal and state funding. A common question is, why is a parent even necessary? Why can't I just be the student on my own? I'm not going to be contributing. My parents aren't able or aren't willing to help. And mostly the reason is because that's what the US Department of Education says, so they have to. In order to be independent, meaning that no one's financial information besides the student, so it's only the student, they have to say yes to one of these questions. So just because a parent is not able or not willing to help, that's not necessarily a reason why the student would be independent. Something that I like, this is the case for all financial aid forms, for both the FAFSA, the CSS profile, and the International Student Financial Aid application. They're all going to be using what's called prior year info, meaning 2 years ago. So right now, all of these forms are asking for financial information from 2021. Advantages of this is you can fill it out earlier, you have final numbers, even if you took an extension, you most likely have this done, so you're not trying to guess or estimate or rush people to get your taxes done. And it has allowed schools to get financial aid awards out earlier than the past, where most people are filling this out in February and March. One disadvantage, though, is we're using 2-year-old information. And sometimes life happens and things are different. And we'll talk a little bit about what to do in those situations coming up in a few slides here. Something that's coming in the future, so not relevant this year, but just trying to place in the back of your mind for next year, is that the FAFSA is going to be changing a year from now, and there will be some things like that. EFC is going to become something called the Student Aid Index. It's going to ask a lot fewer questions. They're really trying to make it easier for families and students. But one of the questions they're eliminating is the number in college, because and I trust the data shows that most people who get the Pell Grant, having a different number in college doesn't impact that. I would think that there are a lot of families where actually having 2 tuition bills is a difference than having 1 tuition bill. But as of right now, that question is going away. So again, nothing immediately relevant right now, but just trying to make a quick little note. And then the next thing I just want to briefly touch on while we're talking about federal stuff is the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan as of right now. And I'm not trying to say this is the best thing in the world. I'm not trying to say it's the worst thing in the world, but I've had enough students be like, hey, I saw this on TikTok, or someone said this on Facebook, where I thought, I'm just going to have a quick 60 seconds talking about this so that hopefully I'm a more reliable source than TikTok. So it's only federal loans. So like I said, the subsidized, the unsubsidized, consolidated, which means like kind of mushing those two together, or plus loans. And it had to be dispersed before July 1st, 2022. So we've had a good number of students be like, hey, can I take a loan right now in the current fall semester and get it immediately forgiven? And the answer is no, it had to exist prior to this summer. But we do have some students who are maybe a current junior, and maybe their loans from their first 2 years are eligible, but their loans from junior and senior year might not. And the application actually just became officially available today or yesterday. One of the two, yesterday or today. So the other thing I talked about, the other financial aid form, is something called the CSS profiles. And this is a financial aid form run by the College Board. So the same people that do SAT and AP tests. And it's required by about 350 schools across the country. The 3 schools in Minnesota are Carleton, McAllister, and St. Olaf. It's the Ivies, it's Stanford, it's Colorado College, it's Rice University. It's a lot of the higher sticker price private schools that do a lot of their own institutional need-based aid. There is a fee for the CSS profile, but that fee is waived for US citizens and permanent residents with a family income under $100,000. And sorry, one other thing I forgot to mention, the CSS profile can be filled out by both domestic students and international students. St. Olaf does not have a preference whether we get an CSS profile or the International Student Financial Aid application from our international applicants, whichever is better for them. The CSS profile does cost money. So if you are an international student where paying the fee to file the CSS profile is going to be a burden, please fill out the International Student Financial Aid application that's on our website. It's a PDF, it's free. We do not give out waivers for the CSS profile because there is that free option through the International Student Financial Aid application. And if you are living abroad, you fill out the CSS profile in your home currency, and then it converts it to US dollars. For the International Student Financial Aid application, you would have to do that conversion first and report it in the US dollars. So you do all this. You apply for financial aid, you get your grants, you get your scholarships, you get a financial aid award. What do you do with it? Well, as you're looking at various schools, you want to make sure to compare what is the overall cost of attendance? What's the total budget number? But then also, what's the total amount of aid offered? And almost most importantly, what kind of aid is offered and how much of that is grant or scholarship money? You know, I think back to when I worked at a high school and I was working with this student who was so excited. They showed me their financial aid award. They'd gotten into Spelman College, which is a great school down in Atlanta. They showed me the financial aid award that said, hey, total amount due after financial aid, $0. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to Spelman. Everything is great. This is my dream come true. Hooray. They were so excited. But then when we looked at the financial aid award, they had listed a $25,000 a year Parent Plus loan. So then I had to work with the student and be like, well, yeah, there's nothing due after financial aid if your parent takes out a $25,000 a year loan. And they're like, oh yeah, no, they're not going to do that. So that's where you want to make sure to like look at what's the different kinds of aid that is offered to you and the different amounts of loans. And then you'll want to ask schools questions about, is the grant or scholarship renewable? You know, if so, what do you have to do to get it? You know, do you have to have a specific GPA? If it's something for theater, do you have to be a theater major, or do you just have to be like acting in a play or something like that? You know, something else you want to look at is the amount of work study realistic? You know, there's one school in Minnesota that gives everybody a $5,000 work award. I think there are definitely some students that can earn $5,000 working 16, 18 hours a week. It's not every single student. So, and then you want to ask things like, will the aid change from year to year? Tuition is going to go up. Tuition always goes up. what happens to your financial aid when tuition goes up? And just some of those important questions to ask. And then I think the most important thing is to figure out the net price, or how much isn't free at the various schools. So you'll take what you're going to get charged, and you'll subtract your grants and scholarships and figure out, okay, how much isn't free for me to go to this school? Because if a school, let's say, costs $70,000 and you get $69,000 in grants and scholarships, you don't really care about the $70,000 number. You care about, oh, there's $1,000 that isn't free. And that's the more useful number to compare against. Maybe there's a different school where it costs $10,000 is the bill, and you're getting $5,000 in scholarships. So it's like, okay, that amount that isn't free, that's the most important thing to figure out and compare across schools. And then I like to subtract the loans that a student might be offered, just because those are guaranteed aid. You might not want to take them, that's totally fine. But with the loans that are listed, you know you can access that money as long as you fill out the form. And then you can subtract work study. And I do that last just because not everybody can like earn all of their work award, because sometimes it's like, I don't have the capacity to do that, especially maybe that first semester, first year. So looking at St. Olaf's financial aid award, I generally think this makes sense, but that's also partially because I designed it. And if you see better versions or things that are confusing about it, please, please, please reach out to me. So we just kind of start, hey, here's your overall cost of attendance, tuition, housing, and meal plan billed by St. Olaf. Here's how much is not, or sorry. So you're going to be billed $67,100. Then we clearly list all of the grants and scholarships. Okay, how much doesn't have to be paid back? List them all, and then, okay, this is your bill after grants and scholarships. This is that net price. This is how much isn't free. And then we divide it by 2 because we bill half for fall semester and half for spring semester. And then, okay, here's the loans, and we kind of do the math again. So trying to like really make it clear and walk a family through what the numbers mean, because it can be confusing. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about how you were using 2021 information. That leads to a common special circumstance, which is like, hey, the numbers on my financial aid application, whether that's the FAFSA, the CSS profile, or the International Student Financial Aid application, those don't tell the whole story, or there's something that has changed in our family situation. We know there's been a lot of changes for students and families over the past 2 years as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it might be, hey, my family made $100,000 in 2021. That is accurate. That's what we put on the FAFSA. That's what we put on the CSS profile. But I got laid off in March of 2022. And in 2022, I only made $40,000 or something like that. On the FAFSA, there's no way for a family to tell us that information directly on the form. They'd have to follow up separately. One of the reasons why we require the CSS profile is that because it allows families to tell us this nuance, tell us this context that isn't necessarily captured on the FAFSA, where you could give us that information, or you could say, hey, my income in 2021 was 100,000, but 10,000 of that was because I switched jobs and I had to cash out a lot of old vacation and PTO days at my old job. Or, hey, this is what's going on, but we have these medical or dental expenses, or these extended family expenses, or anytime a family's financial circumstances has changed, it's worth notifying our office. We might not necessarily be able to do anything with it, but it's always worth reaching out to us and letting us know. And then we can let you know, okay, yep, this looks good. Tell us a little bit more about this. Or, hey, can you give me this document? And that's what I tried to do down here at the bottom, is providing documentation. So if you lost your job, we're sorry to hear that. What we're going to try to do is figure out, okay, what is a reasonable estimation for the new family income after that job loss? So, okay, it might be you made $20,000 before you got laid off, and then maybe you got 10,000 in unemployment or something like that. So we're happy to work with your family as far as what we might need, and that can vary a little bit from situation to situation. But again, anytime there's been a change to your family's financial circumstances on any of the forms, please reach out to our office. And the final thing I want to just kind of end on is like, paying for college is scary and it can feel overwhelming, whether that amount due is $500 or $50,000. And that's part of the job of my office and the student accounts or the bursar's office to help work with students and families through that process. And one of the things we do is don't worry about trying to solve all of whatever that dollar amount left over is in one single action. You know, maybe it's $5,000 that's left over. Okay, can a student work during their senior year or work during the summer before school starts and save up a little bit of money? They might not be able to do the full amount, but maybe they can help by taking 1,000 or earning 1,000, something like that. Or maybe they're able to earn $1,000 in an outside scholarship, that kind of thing. And really trying to help students and families be like, okay, every little bit helps. And then asking questions of the schools of how often will billing happen? Is it twice a year? Is it 3 times a year? Does the school offer payment plans? Are there fees to go on the payment plan? Is there any sort of interest? That kind of thing. And really trying to just break it down so that it might be something like, okay, there's $10,000 that isn't free at this school. We feel comfortable taking $5,000 a year in loan. Okay, so now we're down to $5,000 that's left. And okay, billing happens twice a year. And you know what? The student was able to make $1,000 over the summer. Okay, so now we're down to $1,500 for the spring or for the rest of that fall bill. Okay, the parents can help with that. Or it might be, okay, we can do a payment plan for a portion of it, and really just trying to break it into those little buckets and make it feel a little bit less overwhelming. And that's just really, that's a very normal and real question for a lot of students and families to ask. And don't hesitate to ask it just because you're worried that maybe you sound silly or something like that. Like, that's part of our job as we go through this process, is to help families figure out that kind of last little thing. Are there questions about various things I've talked about, or where you want a little bit more details? If so, either unmute or feel free to send something in the chat. And sorry if you hear a little bit of babies crying in the background. My wife and I have 2-year-old twins, and right around now is bedtime. So if you hear a little bit of baby crying, I'm sorry. Question, if I apply for spring transfer admission, do I need to fill out the FAFSA again for? So in that situation, it would be probably the FAFSA you're doing for your current school. But if you didn't list St. Olaf on the FAFSA, you would need to go back in, add St. Olaf, and resubmit. So let's say you're attending the University of Texas and you're like, I didn't apply to St. Olaf initially, but now I think I want to do that. You'd go back into the FAFSA for this year where you entered in Texas's information. You'd put in St. Olaf school code or search for it and add it, and then resubmit the FAFSA. Yeah, great question. As far as early action versus regular decision, there's no difference as far as merit scholarships. It's just a matter of timing. With early action, you usually find out the first week or 2 of January. With regular decision, it's usually closer to late February, early March. But it's not something like, oh, we have X number of scholarships that we can give out, and once they're out, they're gone. And so students who apply earlier are in a better spot. It's really just a matter of timing, that kind of thing. As far as Jose's, yes, Jose, that's a great question. It is, I wouldn't say it's kind of in between. It usually is with when I'm working with students, it's year by year. But it could be semester by semester. That's totally fine. And it's definitely not something where it's all 4 years at once. Because it might be, I don't need the money my first year. Ooh, I do need a little bit of help my sophomore year. And then, ooh, junior and senior year, I got a great job over the summer that paid me a bunch and I don't need it. So usually it's kind of year by year. But if a student really wants to handle it semester by semester, they can. And it's definitely not the situation of all 4 years at once. Someone else asked about early decision. So St. Olaf does have an early decision $20,000 minimum commitment to all students and families. That is not stackable on top of any other scholarship. So it's usually a really small number of students where that's relevant. If a student, our merit scholarships for academics are something between $22,000 and $30,000 a year. Since all of those are greater than the the $20,000 ED commitment, it's not like you get, a $30,000 academic merit scholarship and the $20,000 ED commitment. So it's not 50. It would be more of a situation where maybe a student had no financial need and the only scholarship they were getting was a $7,000 one from theater. They would then get a $13,000 early decision scholarship to get them up to a $20,000 minimum. Question about music scholarships. You do not need to be a music major. You do need to be involved in the program, which means performing in one of the ensembles, but you definitely do not need to be a music major. And it applies towards your general tuition in that kind of situation. It's not, and if you're getting need-based aid and you decide to stop later on, it might be that need-based aid can replace the music scholarship at that time. One more question is, okay, I've done my forms. Can I get a sneak peek of what it'll look like? And yeah, if you are a student who's already done your financial aid application, either the FAFSA, the CSS profile, or the International Student Financial Aid application, if you want to reach out to me and say, hey, can you give me an early estimate of what my aid award will look like? I am happy to do that. We know families and students can sometimes get nervous with early decision. And if maybe a student's like, ooh, I want to apply early decision, but I'm a little bit nervous about the finances. If you've done your financial aid application, please reach out to me and I'm happy to be like, hey, all right, this is kind of what you can expect. And then your family can decide, yep, that's going to work for us. Let's apply early decision, or, ooh, I don't know if that's going to work. Let's not apply early decision. I'm very happy to do those kind of early reads, early estimates, so that families and students kind of know what to expect going into early decision, because I think that's beneficial for all parties. It's usually not a specific dollar amount in that estimate, but it's usually like within $1,000 or something like that. So it might be like, okay, the tuition room and board is $67,000. And I would expect the student would get something between $57,000 and $58,000 in grants and scholarships. So again, it's not necessarily giving you an exact dollar amount, but giving it in a pretty tight window so that the family kind of knows what to expect before moving forward in the process. And I'm very happy to do that. Please just reach out to me at the email that's listed on here. Great question. What is the difference between early decision and early action? So early decision gets this kind of thing associated with it where it's binding. And I can't speak of what every school sees that, but the way that I view that binding commitment of early decision is that the student is telling us, hey, if I get accepted to St. Olaf and it works out financially, this is where I'm enrolling. So you're kind of signaling that we are your #1 school. every year there's always a few things where life happens or the finances change and a family can't make it work. You can withdraw after being admitted into early decision, that's fine. But the goal of early decision is to be like, hey, if I get accepted and it works out, this is where I'm coming. Early action is not binding, so you're just saying, hey, I kind of like you and I want to find out a little bit earlier than regular decision. So again, you'd find out in that like early January instead of early March timeframe. But it's just timing. There's not necessarily any sort of financial difference for almost all situations. That's okay. Yeah, so does St. Olaf have a minimum EFC for internationals? No. That said, I mean, for students, international students that did not attend a United World College, the highest amount of grant scholarship aid they can receive is 100% of tuition, which would leave all of housing and meal plan not covered by grants and scholarships, and housing and meal plan are a little bit over $12,000. So realistically, an international student in order to make it work here, probably something around 10 to 15,000, but there's not any sort of policy of it has to be 10 to 15,000. Sure, what is the average aid amount of awarded financial aid with an EFC of 0? I would say, and there are always individual situations, but generally a 0 EFC, at least all of tuition is going to be covered by grants and scholarships, and maybe even a good chunk of the housing. And usually maybe something around $5,000 to $6,000 might be covered by either student employment or student loan funds. And again, it can vary from students based on various circumstances, but in general, that's kind of the most common situation, I would say. Any other questions? And if you have a question about, hey, we have a really unique situation where grandparents built this cabin and now it's split between these 3 kids, how do we report that? Please feel free to reach out individually to me and ask me, and I'm happy to help. If you don't want to ask it in front of everybody, that's okay. Anything else? Okay. Yeah. Oh, great question, RCS. If you don't use the IRS data retrieval tool, we would really like to get your tax forms and the W-2s, just because we do see a lot of families that accidentally make mistakes. Like something that happens a lot is a family might include something that's coded as double D on box 12 of their W-2s as money they're putting in towards retirement, but that's actually the money that the employer is paying for the employee's health insurance, and it's confusing single D versus double D. So yes, it can be helpful, especially the W-2s, to be sent to us if you didn't use the IRS data retrieval tool. And yeah, I know there are some weird times where it doesn't work, but thank you for trying. Jose asked a great question about outside scholarships. Yes, St. Olaf accepts all outside scholarships. For the most part, we will stack that on top of whatever you're getting from St. Olaf. You know, we will generally try to not touch any of your financial aid as much as we can, while still following federal regulations. So if we have to touch anything, the first thing we're going to do is reduce any sort of student loan contribution. If we've gotten rid of all the loans, then we might work to get rid of some of the student employment. And really, we're not going to touch any of the St. Olaf grant or scholarship funding unless we've already gotten rid of all of the loans, all of the work study, and we can't fit it everything in. That happens once or twice a year where a student is winning $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year in outside scholarships. It'd be cool if that happened a lot more, because that would mean there'd be a lot more students winning money outside. but it doesn't happen that often. And most students tend to be somewhere in the $1,000 to $4,000 range, where we don't have to make any adjustments, or if we're making any adjustments, we just have to reduce their loan a little bit, which is a good thing. So, yeah, as far as when do we submit W-2s? I would say the best way to do, you can do it whenever. And one of the ways to do that is on the St. Olaf Financial Aid website. If you scroll down a little bit, there's a secure electronic document submission link where you can say, hey, this is coming from Steve, here's my email, and then you just upload the files here. That's a much better, much more secure way to get the information to us versus just attaching it to an email. All right, back to a question about the CSS profile. Do you have to commit? No, I mean, we see it asks you them. We don't really pay a ton of attention to that screen because we know life happens, and okay, maybe on October 5th, you were planning to apply to University of Hawaii early decision, and then you're like, actually, I love winter, I want to stay in Minnesota, and it doesn't drive anything in our system. It's maybe this is, hey, this is what I'm thinking as of right now, but it's not necessarily what I'm definitely going to be doing. If there's nothing else, this was being recorded. It'll get uploaded to the website. And then if you want to come back and watch it again, or if you want me to share my presentation, I'm happy to do that with you as well. Yeah, how do you know if we got it? So generally we get a CSS profile within a day or two after you do it. And the FAFSA usually takes 3 to 4 days from when you do it. We used to automatically send emails to everybody letting them know we got it. And then students and families thought that those emails were a little bit unnecessary because they're like, yeah, we submitted it to you. We assumed you got it. So we don't automatically send emails to people confirming that we received your documents. But if you want to individually reach out to us, we're really happy to confirm, be like, yep, we got your FAFSA on this date, we got your profile on this date, that kind of thing. But we don't automatically tell you. Because people told us that it was unnecessary. So otherwise, going once, going twice. All right, with that, I'm gonna stop the recording first.